Tonight, we begin our special investigation into the January 30th smoking guns. This is Part 1, The Network. On January 30th, 2026, the United States Department of Justice released the largest cache of evidence in criminal history. 3.5 million pages. 180,000 images. 2,000 videos. This wasn't a routine document dump. This was the unveiling of a transnational criminal enterprise that merged sex trafficking with intelligence gathering, financial fraud, and geopolitical influence peddling. The Epstein Files Transparency Act, signed into law in November 2025, forced the government to expose what it had hidden for decades. Over 500 attorneys reviewed the files. The result? Irrefutable proof that Jeffrey Epstein was not a lone predator. He was a functionary in a system designed to protect the powerful. For years, the media sold us a narrative. Jeffrey Epstein was a rogue financier who exploited his wealth to compromise powerful men. The forensic reality revealed in these 3.5 million pages tells a different story. Epstein operated at the center of a functional organism that required 4 critical components to survive: financial capital, diplomatic protection, intellectual legitimacy, and operational machinery. Each sphere provided specific utility. Each sphere was complicit. This investigation moves beyond gossip to map the architecture of impunity, the shell companies, the smoking gun emails, and the institutional failures that allowed this enterprise to operate for 20 years. This was not a social club. It was a hierarchical system where each participant played a role. Royalty provided untouchability. Billionaires provided liquidity. Academics provided legitimacy. And the machinery, the pilots, lawyers, and recruiters, provided the logistics. Understanding this structure is essential to understanding how Epstein evaded justice for so long. Epstein's association with heads of state and royalty was not social climbing. It was strategic armor. The most valuable asset wasn't money. It was immunity. When law enforcement in Florida attempted to prosecute him in 2008, his legal team invoked his connections to foreign dignitaries and intelligence agencies. The presence of a British royal at his properties normalized the trafficking of young girls and intimidated investigators. This sphere was functional, not ornamental. It provided the ultimate defense, the appearance that prosecuting Epstein would create an international incident. And at the center of this diplomatic shield, we find Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, formerly Prince Andrew, Duke of York. The January 30th files definitively identify Andrew as a central participant in both the social and intelligence operations of the network. His alias, the Invisible Man, or simply A, appears throughout email correspondence. Biographical markers, references to Balmoral, his naval career, and his official trade role as UK Special Representative for Trade and Investment from 2001 to 2011, confirm the identity beyond doubt. And here we find our first smoking gun. On August 16, 2001, an email from A to Ghislaine Maxwell with the subject line "Friends" reads, "Have you found me some new inappropriate friends?" This is not the language of a naive associate. The word inappropriate is a direct acknowledgement of illicit criteria. Maxwell's response, that she could only find appropriate friends, indicates a shared understanding of what inappropriate meant: underage, coerced, or otherwise compromised individuals. This email destroys the defense that Andrew was unaware of the nature of Epstein's operation. But it gets worse. In September 2010, 14 months after Epstein's release from prison as a convicted sex offender, Andrew sent him another email: "We could have dinner at Buckingham Palace and lots of privacy." In 2008, Epstein was convicted of soliciting prostitution from a minor and required to register as a sex offender. Any claim that Andrew distanced himself after the conviction is obliterated by this email. Andrew was not avoiding Epstein, he was inviting him into the seat of the British monarchy. This was reputation laundering at the highest level, using the crown to rehabilitate a convicted predator. And then, on Christmas Eve of 2010, we see the true nature of their transactional relationship. Andrew sends Epstein an email with an attachment titled Afghanistan International Investment Opportunities. The message reads, "This is a confidential brief produced by the Provincial Reconstruction Team in Helmand Province. I would be very interested in your comments, views, or ideas on who we should show this to." The document was a classified UK government briefing on untapped mineral wealth in Afghanistan, lithium, gold, uranium, estimated at $1 trillion. This intelligence was intended for state-level strategic planning, not private brokerage. As the UK's special representative for trade and investment, Andrew had a legal duty of confidentiality. Sharing a confidential military and reconstruction brief with a private citizen, especially a convicted sex offender, constitutes a potential violation of the UK Official Secrets Act 1989. Andrew was feeding Epstein high-value commercial intelligence. Epstein, in turn, could pitch deals to sovereign wealth funds. The email references Abu Dhabi connections, effectively monetizing British war efforts for private gain. This was not a friendship. It was a transactional relationship where state secrets were currency. As of February 2026, Thames Valley Police is assessing these claims. King Charles has stated he is ready to support the investigation. But the network extends far beyond British royalty. Enter Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem, the former CEO of DP World, the Dubai-based global logistics giant operating ports across 6 continents. His relationship with Epstein, revealed in the January 30 files, was characterized by the exchange of sexually explicit emails and extreme material. The files show hundreds of emails between the two men, revealing a bond that went far beyond business. And then, on April 24, 2009, we find this chilling message from Epstein to bin Sulayem: "Where are you? Are you okay? I loved the torture video." This single sentence is one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence in the entire 3.5 million-page release. In the dark web taxonomy of extreme abuse materials, torture is a specific category involving non-consensual violence, sadism, or snuff content. For a high-profile CEO and a convicted sex offender to casually discuss loving such a video indicates a shared pathology that transcends mere sexual exploitation. This is how compromat works. The material is so extreme that it creates a blood pact of mutual assured destruction. If bin Sulayem provided or appeared in the video, Epstein held the power to destroy him instantly. If they watched it together, they were bonded by a shared felony. On February 13, 2026, 2 weeks after the files were released, Sultan bin Sulayem resigned from DP World. The company has not commented on the nature of his departure. And the diplomatic connections don't stop there. We find Thorbjorn Jagland, the former Prime Minister of Norway and chairman of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, acting as a diplomatic sanitizer for Epstein. In a May 2013 email, Epstein instructs Jagland to tell Vladimir Putin that I advise Gates. Epstein used one high-value contact, Bill Gates, to leverage access to another, Vladimir Putin, via a diplomatic intermediary. Jagland's role was to sanitize Epstein's reputation in European diplomatic circles, presenting him as a legitimate advisor to global philanthropists rather than a convicted sex offender. And this brings us to the second sphere of influence, the sphere of capital. Epstein didn't generate wealth. He managed it. Epstein's financial genius was not investment acumen. It was access. He positioned himself as the intermediary between billionaires and opportunities they could not access alone: offshore tax shelters, insider deals, and geopolitical intelligence. In exchange, these titans of industry provided him with liquidity and, crucially, wall of cash status at major banks. This designation meant his transactions were exempt from the automated compliance systems that flag money laundering and trafficking. The billionaires didn't just fund the operation. They immunized it. Let's start with Les Wexner, the billionaire who gave Epstein everything. Leslie Herbert Wexner, founder of L Brands, which includes Victoria's Secret and Bath and Body Works, had a net worth of $7.2 billion as of 2019. Wexner granted Epstein unlimited power of attorney over his vast fortune. This legal instrument allowed Epstein to control $1.3 billion in stock sales, buy and sell properties, and manage Wexner's financial empire without oversight. Wexner has claimed he was a victim of embezzlement. The forensic pattern suggests otherwise. During the congressional review of the January 30 files, Representative Ro Khanna viewed unredacted FBI documents. On February 10, 2026, he publicly revealed that an FBI file explicitly labeled Les Wexner as a co-conspirator in the Epstein enterprise. The label was supposed to be redacted in the public release. Due to faulty PDF redaction techniques, black overlays without flattening, Internet researchers were able to copy the text from under the black bars, confirming Khanna's claim. Wexner's legal team argues he was a victim, not a perpetrator, and that Epstein misappropriated $46 million. However, forensic analysis shows this money was returned to Wexner via charitable transfers, a circular flow that looks less like theft and more like a tax avoidance scheme. Then there's Bill Gates, the philanthropist who gave Epstein legitimacy. William Henry Gates III, with a net worth exceeding $130 billion, met with Epstein multiple times after his 2008 conviction, including visits to Epstein's Manhattan mansion. Gates has stated he regrets the association and claims he was seeking philanthropic advice. The emails tell a different story. The files contain references to strain pandemic simulation and biological defense projects, indicating Epstein had access to confidential details from Gates' think tank, BGC3. This was not public information. Epstein used his association with Gates to present himself to foreign leaders, like Putin via Jagland, as an advisor to the world's most famous philanthropist. Gates was the ultimate credential, a way to transform a convicted sex offender into a global power broker. In 2021, Gates admitted the meetings were a mistake and stated, "I didn't have a business relationship or friendship with him." And then there's Elon Musk. Elon Reeve Musk, with a net worth exceeding $200 billion, was a trophy contact, a target for cultivation. The files reveal a persistent effort by Epstein to cultivate Musk, leveraging the billionaire's celebrity and his documented interest in wild social experiences. In 2012, an email from Musk to Epstein reads, "What day/night will be the wildest party on your island?" Musk claims he declined the invitation after learning the ratio of women to men was suspicious. He has stated he had minimal contact with Epstein and never attended events on Little St. James. While no smoking gun of direct abuse exists for Musk in these files, the inquiry itself betrays an awareness of the island's reputation. Epstein viewed Musk as a trophy, someone whose presence would validate his status in tech and innovation circles. Emails show Epstein constantly name-dropping his high-profile contacts to impress others. He tried to organize lunches at SpaceX to show off his access to Musk. He used his relationship with Gates to open doors in Russia and the Middle East. He leveraged Wexner's retail empire to gain legitimacy in business circles. These were not friendships. They were transactional relationships where proximity to power was the currency. And for the billionaires, Epstein offered something they couldn't buy: plausible deniability. He was the fixer who could arrange the unarrangeable, and if anything went wrong, he was the fall guy. The third sphere of influence was the intellectuals. Epstein donated millions to MIT, Harvard, and other elite institutions. He hosted scientific conferences at his Manhattan mansion and his island. He positioned himself as a patron of cutting-edge research in artificial intelligence, genetics, and theoretical physics. This was not philanthropy. It was reputation laundering. By associating with Nobel laureates and renowned scientists, Epstein created a veneer of intellectual legitimacy that made it harder for the public to believe he was a predator. The intellectuals provided cover. And in exchange, they received funding, access, and invitations to exclusive gatherings. One such intellectual was Dan Ariely, a professor of behavioral economics at Duke University, known for his research on honesty and irrationality. Ariely was a frequent guest at Epstein's gatherings, which were framed as intellectual salons where scientists and academics could discuss cutting-edge ideas. In September 2012, an email from Ariely to Epstein asks for the contact information of a redhead he met at Epstein's home, describing her as very, very smart. The name is redacted, but cross-referencing with flight logs and known associates suggests this was one of Epstein's highly educated recruiters or assistants. These women were intelligent enough to engage in sophisticated conversation with academics, attractive enough to entrap them, and compromised enough to be controlled. This was the honeypot strategy: tailor the lure to the target. This is the insidious logic that protected Epstein for years. If Stephen Hawking attended a conference on his island, if MIT accepted his donations, if Harvard professors dined at his mansion, then surely he couldn't be the monster the victims described. The presence of respected intellectuals created cognitive dissonance. It made investigators hesitate. It made journalists second-guess. And it made victims feel like they would never be believed. The intellectuals may not have participated in the abuse, but their presence enabled it. The fourth sphere was the machinery, the operators who made it function. The network could not function without the machinery, the individuals who handled the logistics, managed the money, recruited the victims, and ensured the operation ran smoothly. This sphere includes pilots who flew the trafficking routes, lawyers who structured the shell companies, accountants who laundered the money, and recruiters who built the pyramid scheme of abuse. These were not passive bystanders. They were active participants. And the January 30th files exposed them in unprecedented detail. At the center of the machinery was Ghislaine Maxwell, the operational CEO of the trafficking ring. Ghislaine Noel Marion Maxwell is currently serving 20 years in federal prison. The files reinforce Maxwell's role as the operational CEO. She managed the recruitment charts, coordinated the two-legged sightseeing trips for Andrew, and enforced the rules of the houses. She was not Epstein's girlfriend. She was his business partner. A handwritten chart found in the files, corroborated by audio recordings from victim Haley Robson, details a payment structure where victims were paid not just for sex, but for recruiting other girls. The mechanism worked like this: Victim A is abused and paid $200. Victim A recruits Victim B and receives a $200 finder's fee. Victim B recruits Victim C, and both A and B receive payments. This creates a psychological bind. The victim becomes a perpetrator, silencing them through guilt and fear of prosecution. This was not a series of isolated incidents. It was an industrial-scale, self-perpetuating system designed to generate a constant supply of victims. Then there were the executors who architected the cover-up, Darren Indyke and Richard Kahn. Indyke was Epstein's attorney and executor of his estate. Kahn was his accountant and executor. These two men were not just estate executors. They were the architects of the financial cover-up. They managed the 34 shell companies, facilitated the loans to figures like Peter Mandelson, and ensured the wall of cash remained impenetrable. Their names were supposed to be redacted in sensitive legal filings. Due to the DOJ's faulty redaction technique, their identities were exposed, confirming their central role in the financial machinery. And then there were the pilots and staff, the silent witnesses. The pilots who flew the Lolita Express. The housekeepers who cleaned the properties. The security guards who monitored the cameras. The assistants who scheduled the appointments. These individuals witnessed the trafficking firsthand. Some have testified. Many have remained silent. The files contain flight logs, staff schedules, and surveillance records that prove these individuals were not just employees, they were enablers. The question is not whether they knew. The question is why they didn't stop it. Why didn't the machinery speak up? Fear of retaliation. Non-disclosure agreements backed by aggressive legal teams. Generous compensation that made silence profitable. And, in some cases, complicity, the knowledge that they, too, could be prosecuted for their role. The wall of silence was not accidental. It was engineered. Epstein and Maxwell created a system where speaking out was more dangerous than staying quiet. The genius of Epstein's network was its interdependence. The billionaires provided the money that paid the machinery. The machinery provided the logistics that served the billionaires. The royalty provided the diplomatic shield that protected everyone. The intellectuals provided the legitimacy that made the whole operation seem respectable. When one sphere was threatened, the others closed ranks. When Epstein was arrested in 2019, the network didn't collapse. It adapted. The banks retroactively filed reports. The executors restructured the estate. The powerful distanced themselves publicly while maintaining private ties. This was not a house of cards. It was a fortress. The January 30th files prove that Epstein's network was not a loose association of wealthy men who occasionally socialized. It was a structured, functional system with clear roles, financial incentives, and mechanisms of control. It had its own economy, shell companies and banks. It had its own diplomacy, royalty and politicians. It had its own intelligence apparatus, compromat and blackmail. And it had its own recruitment bureau, the pyramid scheme. It operated in plain sight for 20 years because it was designed to be untouchable. And it almost succeeded. Let's recap the smoking guns from part 1. Andrew's inappropriate friends email from 2001. Andrew's Buckingham Palace invitation in 2010. Andrew's Helmand intelligence leak in 2010. Bin Sulayem's torture video email from 2009. Wexner's co-conspirator FBI label. Gates' access to confidential pandemic projects. Musk's wildest party inquiry from 2012. Ariely's redhead honeypot request from 2012. And Maxwell's recruitment pyramid chart. These are not allegations. They are documented facts, preserved in emails, financial records, and FBI files. The network is exposed. But here's the thing, the DOJ released 3.5 million pages. But it identified 6 million pages of evidence. That means 2.5 million pages remain classified. What do they contain? More names? More smoking guns? More evidence of institutional complicity? The fight for transparency is not over. The January 30th release is not the end. It is the beginning. In part 2, we dissect the financial architecture that made this network possible. The $1.3 billion JPMorgan cover-up. The 34 shell companies in the U.S. Virgin Islands. The wall of cash policy that exempted Epstein from compliance. The catastrophic redaction failures that exposed victims. And the final verdict, a state within a state. If part 1 revealed who was involved, part 2 will reveal how they got away with it. The release of the Epstein Files is a victory for transparency, but it is not justice. Justice requires accountability. It requires prosecutions. It requires dismantling the systems that enabled this network to operate. The survivors deserve more than exposure. They deserve restitution. And the public deserves answers. The smoking guns are now in the open. The question is, what will we do with them? Like, share and ring the bell to be notified of future videos. Presented by Word Up Media Network.